you look at the oil industry in America,
Mm-hmm.
the oil and fracking industry in America, and they have, 3 or 4 oil reps lobbying every single member of the American government. 3 to 1. Things like that. I think we have to try and get to a stage where government works for people and doesn't work for business.
Michael, I want to bring you in on that, because I was reading the other day, and I'd commend it to anybody who's interested in a left-wing anti-independence perspective. I was reading the Red Paper Collective, which has been put together by a few pro-union trade unionists and Neil Finlay, who's a Labour MSP that was elected in 2011. And one of the arguments they put in that pamphlet is one fundamentally, I suppose, rooted in Marxist explanations of social power, and it is to argue that the concentration of capital is in London, ergo the concentration of power is in London, and therefore Scotland becoming independent, if you like, won't address the fundamental power of capital in these islands. It will simply break off from the UK and will still be faced with the dominance of London capital, and therefore pro-independence messages won't actually do what Lynda hopes they might do. They will not address these powers of business and capital, and will leave us significantly weakened in terms of our capacity to address that politically by breaking up Scotland from England. That's their argument. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, there's two things in that. One is that I suppose independence would reroute some of that capital from London to Edinburgh, so therefore diminishing it in some way would be one thing. But of course, the London capital would still be larger than that in Edinburgh, but diminished somewhat, which is, I think, why a lot of people want to keep the Union, quite frankly, or the British state does. Secondly, you have to think about, okay, look at the position of America in all this. They don't want, in general, they don't want the European Union to break up. They've said that they're going to remain neutral on the topic of Scottish independence, but you can see in some of the things that are coming out in the New York Times and the Washington Post, which are pretty much organs of the state in some ways, although they deny it vociferously. I don't think that they want this. Now, why not? Because it's easier for them to intimidate and bully a small group of politicians controlling a large area than it is to control lots of different groups, and smaller countries and smaller entities can have more independence in a way, because if they can get their hands on the levers of control that you might find in the European Union, then they've got control of that by only having to speak and deal with a few people. But if you make with smaller states, then it's harder to control all of these little small states.
What do you think about that, Lynda? I mean, do you have any qualms at all about the kind of theme I was talking about from the Red Paper Collective argument, that actually, although you might expect an independent Scottish Parliament and Scottish Government to be maybe slightly to the left of what we get in the UK, it certainly couldn't be much more in the neoliberal line, that even so, that the fundamental structures of capitalism won't actually be challenged by Scottish independence, and critically couldn't be. I don't know if that's an anxiety for you at all.
It is an anxiety for me. Yes, there is a capitalist system in the world at the moment, but there are other countries who have managed to live and do better for themselves within that system. For example, the Scandinavian countries that have managed within the capitalist system in the world to lower that gap between rich and poor, to have their high tax, high spend economies. And that's the kind of model that I would see Scotland going in. I see more and more our economies digressing as England would go with the financial sector and with the more right-wing, more capitalist kind of system that you would look to in America. Whereas I would hope that we would go towards more Scandinavian systems. And like Michael says, a lot of our resources will then be rerouted from London through Edinburgh, where we could start to build the kind of country that we want to live in, which I would hope would be a very, very different country from the UK and the system that we have now. Otherwise, what's the point?
Because I mean, I don't necessarily. I'm being very much devil's advocate here in terms of these arguments, but I think it's important to sort of have to worry about them. And I know in one of the past podcasts we had Alex Massey on just before Christmas, and he was arguing essentially that an independent Scotland probably wouldn't have as much manoeuvrability in terms of its policy options as folk who would be arguing for a kind of left, more socialistic, Scandinavian-style social democracy might have us believe and want. I mean, I have Swedish friends, and their attitudes towards the state are actually fundamentally quite different from those that we have in Scotland and in the UK. And one of the problems is, take tax competition, for example, that because we are on the same island as England, and it may not be convincing that an England-based businessman, an entrepreneur, will leave the country and move away to France. It's quite plausible that a rich Scot might consider to relocate themselves over the border, but continue to operate their businesses in Scotland if levels of taxation were significantly higher in Scotland. Now, I'm not saying that should govern how we conduct ourselves, but I don't know, is there an argument to be made that actually these sort of rather shapeless dreams about what an independent Scotland might look like in terms of social justice will actually face reality in a very challenging way, which subverts really these noble goals into something rather more compromised? Michael, I don't know what you think about that.
Well, if you look at it in other countries, I mean, how many people do actually become tax exiles? I mean, a lot of rich people in London could go to, I don't know, the Virgin Islands or one of these places, or go and live in, what's it called? Not Luxembourg, what's the other? Yeah.
There's a range of options.
yeah. I mean, they could go to any one of these places.
The Channel Islands, that's another option.
But they generally don't. I think the kind of mass exodus thing is in some ways a myth. It's just a kind of scare story that they put out. But I mean, at the same time, also you could make the point that a lot of these businesses that, there's the constant story now, the hero of our time is the captain of industry. I don't necessarily agree with that either. A lot of the time these people take more than they give. And if we can find a law, even if we're still in the United Kingdom, if we can find some kind of law or change in the taxation system that could make Richard Branson go away, I'd be all for it.
I often wonder if these rich people that we talk about who are going to move as soon as you tax them higher, do they have families? Do they have wives that go out to their lunch club? Do they have kids that join the pony club and have social lives? And is it all just about money? Are they going to uproot their entire family and their family's social circles and their lives to take them away? Surely money isn't just a driver for them.
Exactly.
One would hope it would be a driver for anyone, but then I imagine if money's going to be a driver for anybody, it's likely to be an entrepreneur that's devoted their life to raking it in. Okay, we can maybe move on at that point then to a slightly different angle on the independence question. Again, Michael, your eagle eyes have spotted story, and this is about the kind of international election observers. Do you want to unpack that a wee bit?
Yeah, well, Craig Murray on his blog put something where he suggested that the government of Scotland should approach the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe and request that I'm quoting now, and request that the Subordinate Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, ODIHR, pronounced ODIR, deploy immediately an election monitoring mission to cover the referendum. And he's saying this based on some of the more ridiculously unfair stories that have been in the coverage on the BBC, particularly what he described as they found the only French person that didn't support Scottish independence to do an interview. So he's suggesting this. The Scottish Government haven't requested it, but the Scottish Democratic Alliance have requested independent monitoring of the election. And the thing is, it's not... People believe with just monitoring elections that it's simply, checking that there's nothing dodgy going on with the ballots. But what they're suggesting is that this group also monitors the media coverage, because it's now become so bad and so one-sided that it's fundamentally changing people's minds on it, or keeping people scared. And they're not getting a fair shake on the yes side. What do you think, Lynda? You're more involved with a media organisation than I am. Do you think there's a call for this?
The SDA, as far as I know, have called for it, but they don't accept calls from just groups. It would have to be the Scottish Government that made that call. The SDA don't have the power to bring these people in, much as they would like to think they have. I would need to know more about what powers they have, how they could change things. What would they do to the media in order to make a difference? I also think that people like us who are kind of political anoraks and follow all the stories and read everything and look at all the things on telly get very, very uptight when we see things that we don't think are fair. I wonder how much your man in the street really is affected by all of that, how much people realise about what's going on. And, The Better Together campaign were so excited about the leaked John Swinney thing, but I wonder how much impact that actually had with your man in the street. Was it worth us getting as uptight about it all as we did?
Yeah, I think I think that's fair, and in that context, we do have to look at the sort of circulation figures for many of these publications. Now, the Scotsman is notoriously in a very bad way financially. Not paying people for their copy increasingly, and trying to make economies and cutbacks. I suppose the argument to keep on a kind of Marxist theme is that the man on the street who, when they're just looking through papers and seeing headlines as they go to their work or whatever, is actually being implanted with a sort of ideological picture of independence, which is effective, not least because it's not regarded as particularly political. It operates quietly and generates particular attitudes, which are actually not really perceived as being intensely political and aren't perceived as being manipulative or promoting a particular agenda. Michael, I don't know what you think about that.
Okay, people don't necessarily directly read the newspaper themselves, but there's a kind of filtering down effect, because if you've read something about this important issue, you go and tell someone, don't you? And people very often sort of repeat what they read. And it's strange when you do kind of media studies stuff, and it's you ask the question, do you believe what you see on the TV or read in the newspaper? And people say no. But then you do it another way and you get them speaking, and what do you know about this subject? For example, I was involved in a kind of media monitoring thing about Israel and Palestine at one point. And they would say, I don't believe what I hear on TV. Okay, tell us what you know about this subject. And then they tell you, and go, where'd you get that? I saw it on the TV. So although people say that they don't necessarily believe it, there is a kind of effect where it filters down, and then people tell their mates, and then the stories, kind of Chinese whispers. And I think it is very important that the media be seen to be clear. I think Linda's got a point. I mean, this monitoring group tends to be quite effective, or very scrupulous in its monitoring, but I think Lynda makes a good point. Even if they monitor it and say, okay, that's unfair, what then happens? Then that's just a story in the newspaper. Monitoring group says it's unfair. I'm not sure there's anything they can do to actually change the barrage of anti-independence stories or to stop them.
No, I suppose, many things in life are not kind of hard regulation where you have clear power to change people's behaviour or sanction misconduct. Often soft power, as it's often called, works quite effectively too, in terms of making people think again about how they conduct themselves. I don't know if we should be too fixated on the kind of final powers, and instead maybe wonder if this would be an effective way of thinking again about how we cover these matters, about whether it's fair, unfair, or what have you.
Can I read what they do in their mission statement?
Yeah, please do.
The details that they analyse include these criteria. Were election candidates and political parties given equal opportunity to present their campaigns and platforms to the electorate? Did election candidates have equal or equitable access on a non-discriminatory basis to public or state media? And were the relevant types of television programmes, such as news programmes or debates, unbiased? Now, you could apply those three things to the Scottish case at the moment, which I think we should be doing, actually, and I don't think you'd get answers that were particularly good for the media.
No, maybe not. No, I know we were discussing that just back on Wednesday, weren't we, about the context of headlines and the extent to which they reflect often rather curiously on the contents of news articles in certain organs of the Scottish press. Well, maybe we could move on then to a question I wanted to ask.
Could I just ask Michael, do we know who these people are? Who funds them? Who chooses them? It's a thing I always wonder, like when people went on about the Electoral Commission, and I asked a few friends, folk in the street, if they knew who the Electoral Commission were, who the commissioners are, who appoints the commissioners, who they're responsible to, who pays for them, and nobody ever seems to ask these questions anymore.
Yeah.
And also, I think it's a really good point, that, because I am very suspicious in general terms of people who are depicted as the sort of independent expert group that happens to take a very close interest and wants to have an impact on how politics functions. Because I don't like this idea of professionalizing or technocracies, creating technocracies of politics, where you have someone like the Electoral Commission, who is probably independent but is still a political actor in the context that we may disagree with them, we may agree with them, and I don't think it's a good idea to say that commissions of worthies should end up deciding all of our politics for us. I mean, that for me was the big problem with the Kalman Commission. Where is the sort of democracy in gathering together